April 1975. American military helicopters airlift embassy personnel and evacuees from Saigon. For many, this is the final image of the Vietnam War. For those left behind, it's only the beginning. At first, the new communist government told them that little would change in their daily routines. If only that had been true. Vin was just 3.5 at the time.
And then overnight, we lost everything. And so my parents saw that if they were to stay behind, regardless of how hard we worked, that at any moment, the communists could take it away.
After the fall of Saigon, many of their fellow countrymen felt the same way. Thousands, if not millions, left when they could. So many of them went north to China that the Chinese closed its borders. Others who fled on land had to go west through the killing fields of Cambodia and Laos. The Chung family had one option: leave by sea, even though none of them had ever been on a boat or even seen the ocean.
Only later did we learn of the tens of thousands of South Vietnamese who were imprisoned and tortured or sent to re-education camps. And then of the hundreds of thousands who escaped in small boats, an exodus of biblical proportions. It's now estimated that since 1975, 2 million Vietnamese boat people put to sea. 400,000 never made it, a human catastrophe that was largely unrecorded. By the end of the 80s, there were more than 100,000 boat people stuck in squalid camps in Southeast Asia, most with little hope of resettlement in the West. Over half were in the British colony of Hong Kong, which by June '88 had ceased to give them automatic refugee status, terming them illegal immigrants until they could pass a screening test that might prove them otherwise. But by June '89, the boat people were still pouring into Hong Kong at the rate of 1,000 a day.
I think now the Vietnamese problem is one of illegal immigration. And of course, only by abolishing the first asylum policy is not going to put an end to that problem. What it will do is to send a clear message to Vietnam and to the rest of the world that we are no longer a port of first asylum. And hopefully that will deter some of the people who want to leave Vietnam for Hong Kong not to do so.
I think we all understand one thing, and that is for Vietnamese migrants who are coming to Hong Kong now, they are no longer refugees. They can only be regarded as economic migrants. They have not come to Hong Kong through legal channels, and they can only be regarded as unwelcomed illegal immigrants. It seems that the only remaining obstacle comes from our government. Now we still have over 1,000 refugees stranded in Hong Kong. So there's a government should have clear policies to eradicate this problem. Options may be to persuade other countries to accept them, though this is really a very remote possibility. Or say we may persuade them to return to Vietnam voluntarily.
There's no possibility of them being resettled. They're illegal immigrants, they're going to be deported. That's it.
What became clear is that there are two classes of boat people in Hong Kong, and that authorities are taking a hard line towards those who landed after June 16, '88, those termed illegals. These people must first wait a year or more to be screened, and then they must prove that they are genuine refugees fleeing political persecution, not economic migrants fleeing communism. Clemens says that at least 85% will fail the controversial screening test and be sent back to Vietnam. That's why at the camp school, children are taught in Vietnamese, not English.
No, we don't teach English. English is the badge of the refugee. They're taught in Vietnamese. We don't want to teach English and give them the hope that they are actually going to be resettled in an English-speaking country.
There are 1,000 children in this camp. 200 are alone, sent out by their parents in Vietnam in the blind hope that they'll get to the West. But there is no hope for most of these people. The camp, like all the detention centers for illegals, is like a tinderbox. Conditions in the camps are deteriorating. There's gang warfare and factional fighting.
I like doing things for the kids and sorting that out. That keeps us all human here. As a Hong Kong citizen, I've got very little sympathy.
He's got very little sympathy because of this, his awesome collection of confiscated weapons, handmade by the gangs from bits of junk and used on each other.
Scrap metal, they've got infinite time and patience.
Yeah.
Toy cars, melted down.
Mace, it's a pure medieval
Yes,
weapon.
medieval weapons. This is what the man was injured with. You know, the one I told you was stabbed through the lung.
He was stabbed through the
With
lung.
one of these.
An abandoned factory shows the other class of boat people in Hong Kong. They have refugee status and they live in open camps like San Yik. These are the lucky ones, though I found it hard to think of them that way. They live in bunks stacked 3 high.
They're just boxes. It's like packing boxes, aren't they?
Yeah,
1,200 boat people are crammed into San Yik, which incredibly is thought to be one of the better refugee camps. They will be resettled in the West, though some have been waiting for years.
How long have you been here?
5 years.
5 years? How long have you been here?
6 years.
6 years. Kai Tak Open Camp, next to the international airport, a hopeless jumble of corrugated shacks. The cases of Cam and the Nguyen's were as nothing compared to what I found here. For 8 years, the Dam family has lived in this packing crate 10 feet by 6. That is, what's left of the Dam family. The patriarch died here last summer. Yet the immigration section here at the Commission for Canada issued over 22,000 immigrant visas for Hong Kong Chinese in the last year alone. That is more than the total number of Vietnamese boat people admitted to Canada through Hong Kong in the last 15 years.
And then the refugees would be just a fraction
Refugees 1,500, which is a small portion of
tiny
that.
amount.
Yeah, tiny amount.
One said he was a former officer in the South Vietnamese Army, that he'd spent 8 years in a concentration camp.
Tell me, where do you want to go?
I want to go to the United States of America.
You do?
Yes.
You know you go into a prison camp here. Did you know that? In Hong Kong.
No, I think that I will...
He doesn't understand that he and his beautiful wife are going to be penned up again in a camp here for months, even years. The refugee coordinator here says the influx of boat people is down 80% this year, but hundreds are still taking the gamble.
It's a tragedy for them. They leave Vietnam because they believe they will be resettled. It causes problems for us, but it's a tragedy for those families who leave in the mistaken belief they can get to Canada or Australia or California.
Hong Kong, as you know, is a very densely populated place, small place, with already a problem of illegal immigrants from China, which we have to send back immediately. You know, no question asked, just send back, repatriation immediately. But on the other hand, we are opening our doors for the Vietnamese refugees, and we don't know how many more will come. So we are really forced into a situation that we have to change the policy. And yet, we don't want to push them off to sea. So the only viable option is to implement this new policy whereby they would not get refugee status automatically on arrival.
They're economic migrants. They're not refugees. Now, refugee is defined as having a well-founded fear of persecution. And most of these people don't have that. The screening will demonstrate that one way or the other, but our impression is that most people don't have that well-founded fear of persecution. They're simply in search of a better life. There's no harm in that, and I understand that. But Hong Kong is not the place to provide it.
Erskine is a former army camp in Hong Kong. It's one of 4 major detention centres housing the 10,000 boat people who have arrived since the deadline. Officials say that only a tiny proportion of them will qualify as genuine refugees. The rest will have to go back to Vietnam. Hong Kong has simply run out of patience with the boat people.
We have nothing to do, we can't go anywhere, we don't have a job and we can't earn money. And we must worry about the future.
But the truth, Nang, is that most of the people here will be repatriated to Vietnam. That is the truth,
yes.
isn't it?
It's that the Hong Kong government say at this moment, but most of us hope they will change their policy.
There is frankly no prospect of the British changing their policy. The question is, how rigorously will they implement it? Are we really intending to send the boat people back by force?
We're not talking about compulsion at this stage at all. All we're saying is that they are being presented with the reality of the choices, that only the genuine refugees, a handful, can have the prospect of going on to the rest of the world. The rest of them will be detained in those camps in Hong Kong because there's no alternative prospect, but under constant encouragement to return to their own country. We had to change the whole balance of the policy that way, otherwise we should have had tens of thousands of people flowing into Hong Kong in the expectation that the rest of the world was going to take them. We had to make it very clear that that was a future that could not and did not exist.
The Hong Kong government has started broadcasting in Vietnamese direct to Vietnam. The objective is to publicise the new policy and help staunch the flow of boat people. British deterrence is endorsed in Vietnam itself.
In fact, some caregivers have wanted to officially call the children their own. But under Hong Kong law, they're not allowed to do so.
In October, the government reviewed its adoption ordinance after the case of 20 unaccompanied children at Hai Island Detention Center was brought to its attention. It later reaffirmed its stance that Vietnamese migrants are not Hong Kong residents technically, and therefore they are ineligible to officially adopt children at the camps.
The man who wrote the definitive book on the boat people, Barry Wayne, says the root of the problem is in Vietnam itself and in the grim conditions that has made them boat people in the first place.
Hopefully there might be more sympathy for all the people in Vietnam with a better recognition that the country has to be brought back into the international community and participate in international events and have assistance, economic assistance, so that it can be rebuilt so people won't want to leave.
Some boat people who have failed the screening test or given up hope of ever getting out to the West are asking to go back to Vietnam. Under a program of voluntary repatriation, they're leaving at the rate of about 100 a month. They're paid to leave by the Hong Kong government, the equivalent of $200 Canadian each, which is almost twice as much as the average annual wage in Vietnam.
Am I the reason you get stoned every week now? Build up integrity, got you texting, emailing me, wanting me to feel with you. Baby, just face reality, move on.
Sometimes it's hard to face reality.